Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is for the moon in Gemini. And before I get into those particular characteristics, I just want to review what the moon represents in astrology. So the sun is this positive force. And when we use the word positive, I really don't like to use that because we, tend to become simplistic and say good and bad, positive, negative. But let's say the yang, which is the masculine, and projects itself out onto the world and is out there for people to see. The aspirational aspect of ourselves. The healthy ego that knows who we are in the world. Okay, the sun. The moon is an internalized energy. It's instinctive, okay? It's reactive. And as such, it's safe to call it a shadow influence, okay? Now, the shadow is something that you could look at it as a challenging type of situation, because when something is reactive, it is responding to the past through past memories, memories that we attach to a particular emotion. Now, of course, you can have a trigger that is a positive one, where you see something when you're walking around and it reminds you of a nice memory from childhood. So it could make you happy. But let's face it, a lot of times when we make these connections, we are actually being triggered with something that is less than positive, and it keeps us stuck in a time that has come and gone. So it's not even real, but we still go along with it because that's just how we're wired, and you have to make a really conscious effort to kind of undo those natural reactions. So, Moon in Gemini comes at this particular situation with Gemini being a mutable air sign ruled by Mercury. So there's a lot of mental activity going on. Mercury is a communicator. The air signs like Gemini are also associated with communication. And, it's interesting looking at it from the point of view of the Tarot, because in the Tarot, the swords connect to the air signs like Gemini. And so they're dealing with communication, but they also represent conflict. So it's almost like saying that when you think, there's automatically going to be conflict. And the irony with the air signs like Gemini is that they tend to believe that they can solve all their problems by thinking them through. And that's where a lot of times they get into trouble, because the mind has its limitations. And with Gemini, having this as the moon sign, there is the tendency in the trap of trying to analyze the emotions away. And I was just reading in my book, which I highly recommend, the only astrology book you'll ever need, just to get some additional insights when I was making this video. And they were talking about how Sigmund Freud actually had a moon in Gemini. He had a sun in Taurus and Scorpio rising. Now, Scorpio is associated with, getting into somebody's psyche. So I can understand that. I'd like to know, if he had planets in the 8th house, which Scorpio rules as well. But in terms of the Gemini part of himself, the moon, is all about that analyzing the emotions and trying to figure out why the person is doing what they're doing, but from a rational point of view. There's only one problem. Emotions are not rational. As I said, it's reactive. So when you react to something, and I used in another video the example of the doctor hitting you with that reflex little hammer thingy, and you just like have that knee-jerk response, you're not consciously thinking that you're going to kick your knee up, your leg up. So you just do something. And that's kind of like what the moon symbolizes, us feeling things automatically and not necessarily, deliberating before we feel something. That's what a reaction is, responding to something else out there, not acting, reacting. So the Moon and Gemini person can really rationalize their actions away or their feelings away. And the more that they do that, the further they push them away and the less they are actually embodying their emotions. And the danger in that is that the person becomes very distant from actual feelings, and they can, it's almost like a lawyer trying to find the loophole to get away with whatever behaviors that they want by using the mind to justify it, okay? In relationships, this can result in people feeling frustrated with the Moon and Gemini person because they never know where the person stands. This is due to the mutability of Gemini, but then the changeability of the Moon itself. And you combine those two and you have a perfect storm of someone who one day may say one thing about how they feel and the next day they feel something different. And that can be crazy making for other people that are in a relationship with this individual. So it's like, will the real Moon and Gemini person stand up? What do you really feel? And how this can also play out in a challenging sort of way is that the Moon and Gemini person may be gung-ho about something and be very enthusiastic about it one day, and the next day they're like, meh, whatever. And they have a change of heart so quickly that, imagine if you apply that to human beings, to other human beings, and you can see where I'm going with this and how this could, spell disaster for a personal relationship. But, let me make it very clear. I'm not saying for 1 minute that anyone with a Moon in Gemini is incapable of committing to a love partner, because I actually know people for whom they have committed to somebody. I'm just saying that there may be a lot of ambivalence in some of them, and just a change of heart very quickly. The other thing along those lines is that Gemini wants freedom. They don't like being tied down. So they need a special person who is not going to smother them emotionally. Okay, so somebody with a sun in Cancer probably would be their worst nightmare. Again, I'm broad brushing, and that might not be the case 100% of the time, but it's not only is it fun to broad brush, it also tends, more likely than not to be accurate. And there's always going to be outliers, but in general, a Moon and Gemini person is very independent, and they require the same from another person. Now, yeah, I will qualify that. Let's say the sun is in Taurus or Cancer itself, and the Moon is in Gemini. That person may not have a problem with someone being very clingy or smothering to some degree, because they have those tendencies themselves. So, with Taurus, it would be more like possessiveness, not emotional smothering, that sort of thing. But anyway, I don't want to paint the moon in Gemini in a bad light, though, because actually this can be a very charming companion. In terms of being a very interesting human being. Moon in Gemini is very witty. It's very literary. So these people would tend to make great writers because you're combining the emotional influence of the moon with the literary ability of Gemini. And that can be a goldmine for a writer to be able to express themselves in a heartfelt way, but also noticing the little details and analyzing these different personalities that are in the novel. Another thing that is great about the Moon and Gemini person is that they have a gift for gab. And so not only do they love to talk for hours, but they also are very interesting to listen to. And they tend to be very curious intellectually. So there is no end to the time, to the depth of the conversation, as well as the far-flung interest, because they are so versatile that they can really bring a lot to a conversation and be in just intelligence too. I mean, let's not forget that aspect of it. Also, the Moon and Gemini individual, because it is an air sign, can really act, in their life. And of course, this is dependent on the other factors, but they can make decisions when they need to without being bogged down by their emotions. And that's very important because sometimes our emotional natures get in the way of us accomplishing our goals. So just like I was talking about the sun, I associate the sun with our goals, what we came here to accomplish. Those goals can be thwarted by the emotions kind of interfering and getting the best of us. So in other words, some people have a lot of experiences, maybe when they were children, where they were criticized, where they were ridiculed, maybe in school, if they didn't, if they weren't as quick learners as other children. That can set up a lifetime of feelings of inferiority, and that keeps them from going out and trying to expand themselves, getting certain training, going to college, or just reading, and trying to broaden their mind. They may kind of push that away. And the Moon and Gemini person, is much more capable of not allowing their emotions to impact their present. And so that can be very good as well. But I will say that they are high-strung and they tend towards anxiety, nervousness, as does the other Mercury-ruled sign, which is an earth sign, Virgo, in which I happen to have the moon in Virgo. Because there's that, whenever the mind is active and you have with this Mercury connection with Virgo and Gemini as the moon sign, the mind gets activated all the time, and the person may think too much. And what happens when we think too much? Worry can take over sometimes. You go, what if this? What if that? And so you have to be very conscious of these tendencies if you have a moon in Virgo, so that you don't allow your imagination to run wild and cause a lot of feelings of anxiety or the like. So if your sun sign is in an air sign and you have the moon in Gemini, you will be someone who is very verbal, very intellectual, and so it will heighten that intellect and that mental approach to life. And if your sun sign is in a fire sign, so that would be Aries, Libra. Let me see. I wanted to tell you that the air signs are, of course, Gemini, Libra, Aquarius. So that was that. But if your sun is in a fire sign, Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius, having the moon in Gemini will give you more of a passionate nature. So instead of being that kind of like dry, analytical type of a person, it's going to give you a little bit more fiery temperament. Creativity will be off the hook. And you can also be a warmer person, because that's the other thing. Analytical signs like air signs tend to be kind of, it's not that they're cold, it's just that they are in their minds, okay? And so if your sun sign is a water sign, I think that this is actually a great combination in a way, because it gives you some distance from your emotions. Water is the emotions. So it allows you some objectivity, and it gives you that space to really consider when you're having an emotional reaction to something, as is normal for a water sign, to really question it and saying, is this really true for me now? Maybe that was how I felt when I was a child. But, do I really have to fear this particular thing or be angry about this particular thing? So I think that would be a great asset to a water sign, to have the moon in an air sign. And also great for creativity, because the moon represents, the water element represents memory and, of course, emotions, and then coupled with Gemini's skill at writing, that would be a great combination for a novelist. And then we have the earth signs, and by the way, the water signs are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And for the earth signs, we're talking about Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn. This can be very good for somebody who has a mental profession. Like, for instance, when we're talking about earth signs, we're talking about tangible goods. So if somebody, for instance, is in the financial industry, which wouldn't surprise me if somebody's an earth sign, they can analyze trends, with that moon in Gemini, and, be very analytical about financial matters, and that can enhance their scope. And it also affords much more emotional stability, because both earth and air are not emotional elements. And so when you combine them, you'll have something. And a practicality. Sometimes air, you could say they're airheads, they're up in the clouds. But earth grounds air signs and makes them use that mental brilliance of Gemini for practical purposes that can enhance the person's life. Okay, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this. And if you would like me to analyze your chart, I have natal chart interpretations available on my website. And they also look at the hot trends for you in certain areas of your life for the next 12 months. My website is ReinaMoonAstrology.com, and the link is below for that. Enjoy your moon in Gemini. Bye.